You know, in ancient China, the dragon symbolized ultimate power, prosperity, good health, and protection. It was the symbol of the Chinese emperor. But Wu Zetian, she was the Lady Dragon Empress who rose above the dragon during her reign. Wu Zetian, the Empress of China you absolutely don't want to cross paths with. Born into a wealthy family, but with a dad who started out as a mere merchant. Yeah, back then, among the four social classes in China, nobles, farmers, craftsmen, and merchants, being a merchant was like being the bottom feeder of the social hierarchy. But hey, Daddy had connections. He buddied up with Li Yuan, who later dethroned and became the emperor of the Tang Dynasty, known as Tang Gaozu. Thanks to that royal hookup, Daddy climbed the ladder, scoring wealth and even upgrading his second marriage to an aristocratic lady. So Wu Zetian grew up with brains, beauty, and the rare opportunity for a girl to read and write. All thanks to her ambitious dad. To add some spice to the story, rumor has it that when she was little, she loved dressing as a boy. One fortune teller even saw her and said, "It's unfortunate he's a boy. If she were a girl, she'd rule the empire." But when she was 14, tragedy struck. Her father died, and her stepbrother took over the household. In line with Confucian values, women were expected to respect their elders and focus on domestic duties. So Wu and her family were bullied, forced to rely on her stepbrother. Fortunately, fate had other plans. The imperial palace held a selection for new concubines, and Wu made the cut. Her mother, bitterly crying and fiercely against it, coming from the aristocrats of the Sui dynasty, knew all too well the dangers of palace life. But Wu? She was unshaken. Her response? "How do you know that it is not my fortune to meet the Son of Heaven?" With that, her mother realized her daughter's ambitions went far beyond the typical expectations of a girl. But before you think this was a fairy tale, hold up. Wu only landed in the 5th rank out of 9 concubine levels. Ouch. But Wu had no intention of staying in the background. Legend has it that Emperor Taizong had this wild, untamable stallion that no one could control. But Wu? She stepped up and boldly declared, "I need 3 things to tame it: a whip, a hammer, and a sharp dagger. First, I'll use the whip. If it doesn't obey, I'll hit it with the hammer. If it still won't submit, I'll cut its throat with the dagger." Emperor Taizong was impressed by her confidence and sense of control. But here's the kicker. This story came from Wu Zetian herself, told to her subjects and officials when she was in power. So, was it a true story that reflected her fearless nature? Or was it a cleverly crafted message, a warning to those who dared challenge her authority? Taizong eventually died, and his youngest son, Li Ji, became Emperor Gaozong. Though Wu had been cozying up to him long before that. It seemed like everything was falling into place for her, right? Wrong. Ancient Chinese customs sent concubines without heirs to monasteries after the emperor's death. So off to Ganya Temple Wu went, serving as a Buddhist nun with no heir and no hair, literally. But Wu Zetian wasn't about to stay sidelined. Rumor has it she sent love letters to Emperor Gaozong, who was still head over heels. He visited her and brought her back to the palace as his concubine, despite her being a decade older. Gaozong was physically weak, and Wu became his power partner, a strong, maternal figure, dominant and decisive. Given his physical frailty from illness and his weak character since youth, Wu began climbing the ladder, facing challenges at every step. She eliminated her concubine rivals one by one. Word on the street is, she'd receive fancy gifts from the palace, only to pass them on to the palace crew. These servants became her eyes and ears, her personal minion network. Basically, she built her spy network long before Queen Elizabeth I had her own spy master, Sir Francis Walsingham. Now, here's some spicy palace tea. Empress Wang had never been the emperor's favorite. Back then, it was Consort Zhou who held that title. Empress Wang, jealous and seeing that the emperor had feelings for Wu, actually supported Wu Zetian to replace Consort Zhou. Surprise, surprise. Turns out, Wu Zetian was even more dangerous than Consort Zhou. As the saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So Empress Wang and Consort Zhou teamed up to try and bring Wu down. Wu Zetian became the highest-ranking concubine and bore Gaozong 2 sons, securing her position. But here's where things get murky. Empress Wang, childless and feeling jealous and insecure, had adopted a son to solidify her place. After Wu gave birth to a baby girl, the Empress visited, and shortly after, the baby mysteriously died. Rumors spread that Wu had orchestrated the whole thing, killing her own child to frame the Empress. Shocking, right? But Gaozong believed the story and sided with Wu, convinced that Empress Wang was responsible for the baby's death. The Empress was deposed and eventually executed. With the Empress out of the way, Wu Zetian officially ascended to the throne. Of course, not everyone was cheering. The old guard advisors screamed incest, because remember, she had once been a concubine to Gaozong's father. They also threw shade at her for coming from a merchant family, clearly seeing her as unworthy. But here's where things get interesting. For those non-aristocrat advisors, this was a rare opportunity. They knew their chances of climbing the ranks were slim, as high positions were almost always reserved for the wealthy aristocrats. Some of them took the risk to side with the emperor and showed their loyalty to Wu, knowing that aligning with her could be their ticket to advancement. After all, they knew what the emperor wanted. So why go against him? But those who opposed her, they didn't last long. Wu had a way of eliminating her enemies permanently. After all opposers were gone, she had more power to pull the strings. According to historians, the emperor sat on his throne, taking counsel from his ministers, while Wu was lurking behind a screen, handling matters big or small. Nothing got past her. The empire's power now rested in the hands of the Empress, a true, behind-the-curtain ruler indeed. As Gaozong's health deteriorated, Wu Zetian stepped up. She didn't just sip tea and look pretty, she ruled. And let's be honest, the sight of a woman calling the shots in ancient China didn't sit well with the old guard. So what did Wu do? She rolled out the imperial exam, her way of getting rid of the haters and bringing in new officials loyal to her. But it wasn't just about loyalty. This move also opened the door for competent men from the lower classes, breaking with the tradition of positions being reserved for nobles. This was a huge move and set the standard for the imperial exam tradition in Chinese history. In doing so, she not only recruited the best talent, but she also won the hearts and loyalty of the lower class, giving them a rare chance to rise. Clever, right? With her own people in power, she pulled the strings from behind the curtain. Even though Gaozong was technically still emperor, though to be real, his 23 of his reign, it was Wu who made the call. However, there was one hiccup. At one point, Gaozong finally realized that Wu had way too much control over him. Kind of a slow reaction, right? To add fuel to the fire, a eunuch reported to him that Wu was dabbling in witchcraft. Gaozong, spooked, consulted his chancellor Shangguan Yi, who suggested deposing her and even drafted an edict to make it official. But Wu's spy network was on point. As Shangguan was writing the edict, Wu barged in and made her case. Big time. And just like that, Gaozong did a complete 180, pointing the finger at poor Shangguan and blaming him for the whole plot. Let's just say the ink brush slipped right out of his hand, and Shangguan's fate was sealed. Execution followed, of course. Ironically, his daughter grew up to become one of Wu's most trusted secretaries. After Gaozong's death, Wu became Empress Dowager and ruled through her son. But when her son and his wife tried to appoint the wife's father as prime minister, Wu smelled trouble. She dethroned him and replaced him with her youngest son, Ruizong. But even Ruizong wasn't allowed to set foot in the palace. Wu Zetian was running the show, and everyone knew it. Her reign wasn't without rebellion. Many who believed wholeheartedly in Confucianism were outraged by the idea of a woman ruling the empire. After all, women didn't belong in positions of power, especially not ruling over men. The Li clan, which founded the Tang Dynasty, took this especially hard. In 684 AD, Li Jingye gathered over 100,000 troops in an attempt to overthrow her and restore the Tang Dynasty. But Wu handled it like a pro. Within about 60 days, she crushed the rebellion and executed those responsible, thanks to her extensive network of palace spies and secret police. Eventually, she convinced Ruizong to hand over the throne, making her the official emperor of China. That's right, emperor, not empress. The rebellion from the Li clan, which had founded the Tang Dynasty, sparked something in her. She realized that to truly assert her power, she needed to break away from the Tang Dynasty's ties to the Li clan. So, she devised a plan. First, she distanced herself from Confucianism, which reinforced the gender hierarchy that didn't serve her. Instead, she threw her support behind Buddhism, which offered a more favorable view of women in power and legitimized her rule by proclaiming herself as its divine reincarnation. Then, she declared the Zhou dynasty, making it loud and clear that this new dynasty belonged to the Wu clan. The Tang dynasty was officially ended. For 14 years, at least, Wu Zetian became the only woman in Chinese history to officially rule as emperor. She unified the empire, conquered new lands, and improved the lives of farmers and peasants. But let's be real, being a woman in 7th century China, ruling over men? The stories and myths about her ruthlessness were twisted by haters who couldn't handle a powerful woman calling the shots. The irony is, before she passed away, Wu Zetian had to make a decision that was both painful and contradictory. If she passed the throne to her son, Li Xian, from the Li clan, it would mark the end of her self-founded Zhou dynasty. But if she passed it to her nephew from the Wu clan to continue her dynasty, she risked losing her rightful place on the ancestral altar, as her spirit tablet wouldn't be included in the worship rituals of the imperial family. Although she had overcome the opposition of the Confucian establishment through her own efforts, in the end, she bent back to Confucianism to secure her place on the ancestral altar. Her final edict was to pass the throne to her son, Li Xian, and she died at the age of 82. Despite her immense contributions to the empire, history painted her as a seductress who climbed over corpses. But here's the truth. She was an extraordinary woman, attractive, politically astute, and an excellent judge of men. With single-minded determination, she broke the rules, picked talented officials regardless of their background, and, yes, likely killed and poisoned those who crossed her path. Her rise to power was steeped in blood, but she led the empire with strength and cunning. Whether you see her as an early feminist or a ruthless ruler, one thing's for sure: Wu Zetian rose above the dragon, and no one could stop her.